Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sara Newman, and I'm so happy you're joining me for this episode of Saturday with Sara. Today we're going to play with the Sir Vagabond Aviator collection from our friends at Stamperia. Now, if you like the other webisodes on Sir Vagabond and Lady Vagabond, you're going to love this aviation style twist on the theme. And if you're new to the steampunk vagabond style, well, let's take a look at this pack of 8x8 patterned background papers, and you'll have a pretty good idea of the style of this collection. So very much steampunk, vintage, very fun collage imagery on here, some old book pages. There's also maps as well as text, as you can see on here. Everything is just beautifully coordinated to give that steampunk vintage vibe. Of course, lots of travel motifs in here. That's the Vagabond approach. And you can see some of them here, as well as the compasses. I think maybe even a Zeppelin or two, and certainly an homage to the Wright brothers in here as well. A lot of fun to use these for just about any theme. And I had a great time with this collection. As you can imagine, there's just so much to play with in here. And of course, everything being totally coordinated just makes it all so much easier. Now, there's also a stencil that I'm going to be using today, and this is the Flower Garden stencil. Now, this you might not automatically think to put with steampunk or vintage, but it goes beautifully and adds a really nice touch of softness to the aviator theme. So the stencil measures about 4¼ inches wide by about 9¼ inches tall. So it's a great piece for a card focal. Now another element to go along, we've got a collection of die-cut chipboard elements. There are 35 pieces in all, and you can see some of them here. Nice large focal imagery size, as well as some smaller accent pieces. There's Sir Vagabond. And here are the rest of the pieces from the collection. Here's Lady Vagabond, there she is again, and as well lots of other accent pieces that work so beautifully on your cards and other paper crafts. So I've got a couple of card projects to share with you today, and of course some demos too. As you can see, we have a lot to explore, and I'm really glad you're here. Come play with us. Let's start by putting together a card together. So I wanted to show you some of the easy design techniques that you can put to use when you're combining the chipboard die cuts as well as these beautiful patterned papers. So starting with this design here, which as you can see, it's a vintage map of New York. It's got a lot going on here. And so the most fun part, of course, is going to be figuring out which portion of this you want to use on your card or your paper craft. So what I've done is started already by covering the front of my 5x6½ inch card base with this pattern paper. And I wanted to make sure that I had New York up here at the top. So I simply placed that down, glued it in place, and then used scissors to trim around the outside edges. Now, if I'm going to add in my collage elements here, my chipboard pieces, so I could start maybe with this really cool clock and place that down here. I've got this, I'm not sure if that's a magpie or a crow, but he's certainly decked out. And then maybe my New York sign on here as well. Now, when you're doing collage groupings, remember the rule of uneven numbers, not necessarily a rule, but a good guideline to use an uneven number of collage pieces. So in this case, I have 3, 1, 2, 3. You could go with 1 as a card focal, or 5 or 7, however you want to go. But 3 is just a really pleasing number to the human eye, and that's why it works so well. Now, what I discovered when I put these down was that it felt like there was a lot of competition between the pattern paper and these elements here. So one really great solution is just a plain white vellum. And if I lift these up and pop this piece down, and I've trimmed this slightly smaller than the front of the card, so it still is allowing the edge of that pattern paper to show, but it's also sort of muting back some of that design. And then when I add my collection of elements here, like so, I have a much more striking card focal. So this is a really great solution if you're ever wondering how you can kind of tone back some of the pattern paper without covering it up completely. Now the other thing I can also add on here, of course, is a script dazzle. These go wonderfully with this collection. So I've got a little hello here, and I could just place this down. This definitely stands out much better on that vellum than it does on that pattern background paper. So as you can see, this gives me a good start to the rest of my card design. Now, if you're wondering about how to adhere this vellum onto the pattern paper, my option is always a glue stick. And you can put a little bit of that stick glue onto the patterned paper itself and then place this down. You can place more glue behind some of these elements where it will be hidden from showing through that beautiful vellum. So here's the start to my card. Now I'm going to slide this off because I did already do the card inside, and I want to show you that. So you can see here I've used a combination of pattern papers. I've added my dazzle here on kind of the more muted of the three designs so that that will stand out. I have Sir Vagabond here, and I have this propeller die cut kind of pointing in, so it's leading your eye right into this image here. So you can also play with some of the direction of your positioning when you're working with those die cuts as well. So what I'll do is glue everything together here and maybe add another element or two, and then you'll find this project in the project gallery for this webisode. Now, this card was made on a pretty standard 5" by 6.5" card base, but I have another card design that has a completely different shape to it. So let me gather my supplies and we can take a look. Now with this card, I'm also starting with a 5" by 6.5" card blank, but I'm also using the center step card cutting die, which is going to give me this really cool shape. Now open up the card and you can see how it looks like on the inside. Such an easy design to incorporate into your card making repertoire, all made simple with the use of a die. So here's the center step card cutting die. It's just one piece, so that's all you need to go along with your paper or your cardstock. So this is what the die looks like. Now you can use this with any of your cardstock or pattern paper as well. I found that it works really easily with one of Hot Off the Press's folded, pre-scored folded white cards. So you can see the score line in here. This will match up perfectly with the score line in the middle of the die. So what I do is simply take this, flip it over, and place it down right onto that card blank. So you don't need to cut away anything. It's exactly the same length. So that makes things really easy. And that score line will line up. You don't even have to double check. It's right in the center. So what I like to do is use my Hunky Dory low tack tape. Just tear off a piece on either side to secure it in place and run it through your die cutting machine. Now, when you're done die cutting this, a really nice thing about Hot Off the Press's folded cards collection is that they will always give you not only step-by-step instructions, card example over here, but also where the mountain folds and the valley folds are when you're folding up your card. So let me show you this. It's really pretty intuitive, but it's always nice to have a little bit of assistance when you're doing this. So this is what your blank white card will look like when it comes out of your die cutting machine. I always like to start with the fold in the center and then fold these in and fold that center step in the front. It's super duper easy to do. Now, once you've got this piece all folded and scored, and you might want to use a bone folder for this, you can decorate this as is. If you want this covered with pattern paper, you can also take the die and die cut a second piece from pattern paper, which is what I did here. Now the 8x8 papers are not going to be quite long enough, which is okay, because if you cut this and fold it up and score it like so, you can actually just slip this right onto your folded card blank. Nest the two together, score them up. It won't go all the way to the bottom on the back, but that's okay. I'll show you what I did on my card project. Now, when you're adhering the two of these together, again, I'm going to recommend that glue stick. It just gives a little bit more of a forgiveness if you need to sort of scoot things over to one side or the other. Okay, let me show you my card design again, and we can see how this comes together. So I've first cut the piece of the card base from that white blank card, and then I covered it with this pattern paper. So you can see it's going to go around only halfway through on the back. But I added one of the die cut chipboard pieces, which just sort of adds a fun touch. And you've got the inking, the faux inking on here already. So it really does look pretty nice, just the way it is. Then what I've done is added lots of the chipboard die cuts as my focal. Here's a large piece. Here's Lady Vagabond, world's greatest aviator. We've got a travel and then this hot air balloon. And I've added a border of some other pattern paper down here at the bottom. Now when I open this up, as you can see, I've got another piece of that pattern paper. Some sort of flying apparatus here, probably made up, as well as a sentiment. Now, one thing you do want to make sure of is that you just keep in mind when you're gluing your chipboard elements onto these sides that you make sure that you're not going to have any glue or foam tape kind of poking out over here so that your card opens up easily. And so this is a great way to put those beautiful pattern papers and chipboard elements in combination to work with a card design that's something just a little bit different. Our next card also features the papers and dies as well as that flower garden stencil. And you can see this design right here on the right hand side of my card front. Now I stenciled this design using the warm gold sparkle texture paste from Creative Expressions. So I'll demo this for you. I want to point out a couple of the supplies that I have on hand. First of all, I'm working onto my craft mat, which is just going to make cleanup a little bit easier. I've got my palette knife on hand, and then I also have my stencil buddy on hand too. And this is going to help me get a nice smooth stencil design here. So I'm going to move aside my card and bring in a piece of just plain white cardstock in this case. You can use any of your nice sturdy cardstock papers. You can also work onto pattern paper as well. So I'm going to pop this down here. Again, I'm using some of my Hunky Dory low tack tape, and that's just going to help me keep my stencil in place. I'll just pull off a little bit of this. You can tape down as much or as little as you want. I'm going to secure this down like so. And then get out my sparkle texture paste. So using the back side of my palette knife, I'm going to scoop out some of this beautiful warm gold texture paste. And I'm just going to apply this right here onto my stencil. Now, as I'm applying this on here, I'm not too worried about putting on too much or too little. That's where my stencil buddy is going to help me out. So trying to be a little bit thrifty with this because I've used so much of this beautiful texture paste that I don't have a whole lot left. Okay, so I'm just spreading this on here using the back of my palette knife. And then what I'm going to do is just grab my stencil buddy. It's got a curved top and then a flat side here. I'm going to hold that flat side so that it is even and at an angle with my stencil and just slowly drag this along here. And you can see how much of that excess I'm getting off of the back here, which means that if there are some areas that I want to come back and retouch, that's really easy to do. So again, just kind of drag this along. I'm holding it at about a 45-degree angle there. And then what I can also do is just use that palette knife to scoop up the excess and pop it back into the pot. It's a great way to conserve your texture paste and any of your other stenciling mediums too. All right, so now what I can do is just pull off my tape on either side. And when I lift this off, I'm going to make sure that I'm lifting it straight up rather than sliding it off of my paper. Okay, so I'll just gently pull this up and set this to one side. I'm going to make sure and give that a nice good wash, but take a look at that beautiful stenciling on here. So pretty and so easy to do. And I love how even with this texture paste and those fine lines of the flowers on the stencil, it really does come out so beautiful. You don't have any of the seepage or any gloppiness in that stenciling, and it is just really easy to do. I love the stencil and I love that texture paste. Well, as we saw, that's why I don't have very much of it left anymore, right? Okay, going back to my card design here, I've got just a little snippet of pattern paper going on over here. I've got a little bit of a border that I've made here as well. And I love how the warm tones of that warm gold sparkle texture paste coordinate so beautifully with the pattern papers. And of course, with our Lady Vagabond here on the front. Now, this piece is all one chipboard element. I've added with foam tape one of the cogs that will go over one of her eyes, and then I've given her a little hair decoration here with some more cogs. Also popped up on foam tape, as well as the Discover chipboard on here too. Now I've inked around the outside edges using the Prism ink pad in Roasted Coffee. Again, just to have another really nice warm tone in here, a little bit of jute twine. And then for my card inside, I've got some more of that patterned paper, and I have a couple of other leftover snippets of that stenciled design, and of course a dazzle to go along. Here's another card I've made using that sparkle paste, but this time I'm using the sea green, which is a beautiful color that coordinates with a lot of the greens and the blue tones in the pattern paper pack. And instead of stenciling with it, I've used it with a spattering technique to create a really fine spattered effect on the front of my card and also on the inside. So maybe as I wiggle this a bit, you can see the sparkle and shine on here. Now this is a really easy way to add a bit of texture to some of your card projects and super simple to do as well. So let's take a look. I'm going to again be working onto my craft mat. I'll move aside my card and bring in just a piece of plain white cardstock. And then again, I'm using my sea green texture paste. I have a little bit more of this than I do of that gold. Again, I'm going to be using my palette knife. I've got a water mister as well as my splatter brush. So what I'm going to do is just simply scoop out, again using the back of the palette knife, scoop out some of this texture paste. Doesn't take a lot. You can always add more if you need it. And then what I'll do is add a little bit of water in a puddle right next to this. And I'm going to use my palette knife to make a watery wash. So here I can see as I'm spreading this, if it looks like it's fluid enough or if I want to add a little bit more water. And just kind of mix this up. And I like using the palette knife for this rather than the brush because it really gives me more control and seems to be a bit more effective. Then what I'll do is bring in my splatter brush, and I'm going to get this a little bit wet. I've just dipped it into some water, and I'm going to pick up on the ends of the bristles some of that beautiful texture paste, watery, sparkly texture paste. And then simply holding the bristles, I'm going to pull them back. Now, you can get a more intense effect the closer you are to your background paper. You can hold the brush higher away and get a finer misting. And of course, how much water you use will also impact the intensity of your splattering. You can do as much or as little as you want to. And once you've got that all splattered, you will have a beautiful background. You just need to let that dry and you will have a piece that you can use right away. So I'm just going to mop up some of this extra sparkle paste, and we'll bring in my card again. Now I'm going to move this to one side and let that dry. And what I've done here is simply, once that was dry, die cut this into an oval, and I've used that as the backing and the contrast to my chipboard elements here. So I've layered my pattern paper onto the front of my card, trimming the pieces slightly smaller than the card front. And then I also did a little fold over technique here in the corner. Now, coordinating the white here with the white of my oval, that just adds some lightness and helps to ensure that all of the elements sort of stand out on their own. A little bit of contrast in there. All of these edges, though, are inked with that roasted coffee ink pad. Then for the inside of my card, I've got some more of that splattering, another strip of that beautiful pattern paper, plus some more dazzles from the card inside and outside collection, and of course, Sir Vagabond himself. All right, now I have one more card to show you, also using the stencil and some ink for a reverse stenciling technique. Now with this card, I have a beautiful combination of pattern papers and chipboard die cuts, and I also have this little border going along here that adds some more color to coordinate with the greens in this map paper. So I used the stencil for this piece, but I used the ocean spray ink to go along. Now, the stenciling is a reverse stenciling technique. It's a super easy way to get a really beautiful effect and a great way to put your stencils to use. Okay, so I'm going to move aside my water mister for now and my ink pad and of course my card too. Once again, working onto my craft mat, I'm going to keep in mind here, if I'm doing a reverse technique, whatever design I'm working with, it will be the reverse. So if I have words or a pattern that I want to be able to read correctly on my stencil, what I'll need to do is flip it over and work on the back side. Now I'm going to bring in just a couple of pieces of scrap paper here. I'm going to place this down. I'll grab my Prism ink pad. Now this is the Ocean Spray. This is a dye-based ink pad, and you need a dye-based ink pad for this technique rather than, for example, a StazOn or solvent ink of that sort, because you need something that will interact with water. So what I'm doing is pressing that ink pad directly onto my stencil pretty thoroughly, pretty heavily here. Want to make sure that I've got lots of ink on here, and you can do as much of that stencil as you want to. And then what I'll do is gently lift this up. You can see I've kind of squished through a bit of that design there. I'm going to move this aside, and I'm going to use my water mister here. When I do this, I'm just misting a couple of quick mists, so I'm not flooding the design at all. I'm going to put another piece of scrap paper under here, and then take my real paper, the one that I want to do my stenciling on, and in this case it's just white cardstock, and I'm going to place it directly on top, flat on top. I'm not sliding things around at all. I want to make sure that I'm holding it in place, kind of smooth that with my hand. Make sure all areas of the cardstock are coming in contact with the stencil. Okay, so kind of burnish it lightly with your hand, and then we'll see how it turns out. So I'm just going to lift this straight up, and you can see how I've gotten the reverse of that stencil design. So you would be able to read the words. It looks like I've used maybe one mist too many, and I've gotten a bit of a blurrier effect. You can really control how much of the design you're able to legibly read, depending on how much of that water you're using. And in fact, I've got one here that I've done using the roasted coffee. So you can see you've got two very different effects on here. It's a wonderful way to get some color and some dimension, kind of faux texture in with your designs. And then of course all you need to do is just rinse off your stencil and you are ready to use it again. All right, I'm going to bring back in my card again and we can take a look at how this was used. So just a snippet going along here on the side. I've got all of these elements up on foam tape, a little ribbon on here. This is a swatch of other pattern paper on here, just trimmed down, inked around the edges and layered up on top. And then for the card inside, I've got more of that beautiful map paper, another little leftover snippet of my reverse stencil design, dazzle, and some more of those chipboard elements. Super simple to do and a really fun and easy card design. And this is our final card for today. A big thank you to our friends at Stamperia for this fabulous collection. And a big thank you to you as well for joining me today. We're so very glad you're here and we're really happy you're part of the Paper Wishes family. Do feel free to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately and you can see them below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. Be sure to see the money saver on the right side of your screen at paperwishes.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, just have a look in the description box below this video. You'll find a link that will take you to our Paper Wishes webisodes page and you can see everything I just mentioned. If you enjoyed our video today, we'd really appreciate a thumbs up. It helps people to find our channel. And don't forget to subscribe. We create 3 to 5 videos each week, so there's always something fun to inspire your creative spirit.